Today we rise to discuss a matter of the gravest importance, literally a matter of life and death. It has been my practice as a Member of Parliament to favor the expansion of free choice and individual human agency in all of our decisions. I believe that government's principal role is to protect the life and liberty of its people, and that doing so means allowing individual people to make decisions for themselves with minimal application of force, in essence to minimize force and maximize freedom. I'm the finance critic, and I have applied that principle to all economic matters. How can we allow individuals to make their own decisions with their own money? Here we talk about a matter that is more important than money, the matter of life and death. And so I look upon this bill to determine whether it extends or withdraws individual freedom and free will from the people to whom it will apply. And as I look through the practical application of the bill, it is my view that this bill will do more to withdraw individual choice and freedom than it will to extend it. Let me begin by quoting the member for Thunder Bay Rainy River, a physician and Liberal Member of Parliament, who said, "My biggest concern, as someone who has spent my whole life trying to avoid accidentally killing people, is that we don't end up using medical assistance in dying for people who do not really want to die." Medical assistance in dying was supposed to be exclusively for people who do want to die, who, having been presented with all the worldly alternatives, have chosen death. But we have a Member of Parliament and former physician on the government side who says that this bill will have the effect of forcing people to a decision they would not otherwise make. And this is not just a theoretical issue. Allow me to read the story of Mr. Roger Foley. I'm reading from the CTV story. Foley suffers from cerebellar ataxia, a brain disorder that limits his ability to move his arms and legs and prevents him from independently performing tasks. Roger Foley, 42, who had earlier in the year launched a landmark lawsuit against a London hospital, several health agencies, the Government of Ontario and the Government of Canada, alleges that health officials did not provide him with assisted home care team of his choosing, instead offering, among other things, medically assisted death. So in other words, we have a state health care system to which everybody is forced to pay, and of which everyone is forced to be a part, from which it is impossible to avoid receiving care because paying out of pocket is illegal. Private insurance is not allowed for essential care. And when this gentleman then goes to the care, the only care the government will allow him to have, they say, "We can't provide you with that care, but here's what we can do. We can end your life. You can pack it in. You can just give up." That is not free choice. That is the state effectively compelling a man to end his life or face endless years of unnecessary turmoil that could have been avoided were appropriate care allowed. That is not free choice, and for that reason, I cannot support this bill. And I add my voice here to thousands of people from the community representing persons with disabilities. And the government is often fond of quoting the UN. The Special Rapporteur, and I'm quoting here from the UN report, the Special Rapporteur on Persons with Disabilities is extremely concerned about the implementation of the legislation on medical assistance in dying from a disability perspective. She has learned that there is no protocol in place to demonstrate that persons with disabilities deemed eligible for assisted dying have been provided with viable alternatives. Mr. Foley's case being a prime example of that. Therefore, those most vulnerable are not given a choice. Rather, they are funneled towards one inescapable outcome and compelled by the state to end their life at threat of merciless and unnecessary suffering, rather than providing these people with the care that would mitigate their suffering and fulfill the wishes of a happy life. They are told they have no choice but to end life altogether. I'm quoting now from disability groups, 72 of whom wrote a letter to this government expressing their opposition to the bill. I'll start with Krista Carr, the Executive Vice President of Inclusion Canada, an organization that works with Canadians with intellectual disabilities. Bill C-7 is our worst nightmare, she said. The community of Canadians with disabilities and their families have long feared that having a disability would become an acceptable reason for state-provided suicide. Or in the words of Dr. Gallagher, an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, Bill C-7 declares an entire class of people, those with physical disabilities, as potentially appropriate for suicide, and that their lives are potentially not worth living. Indeed, were it not for their disability, we would not be willing to end them. I cannot imagine a more degrading and discriminatory message for our society to communicate to our fellow citizens with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, we here are meant to give voice to all Canadians, but most of all to the voiceless. And the voiceless are speaking through their advocates, 72 groups who have spoken out against the bill, the dehumanizing way with which it treats persons with disabilities, and the manner by which it robs them of their free will and human agency. And I fear that it adds to the quiet and sometimes unspoken narrative of certain politicians and opinion leaders who suggest that persons with disabilities do not have the same worth as others, and a concept that I find repulsive. The lives of persons with disabilities are every bit as valuable and precious as the lives of the rest of us. No legislation should ever pass through this House or the next House which devalues the precious gift of life that persons with disabilities should have the right to enjoy. No bill should rob people of their free choice and human agency to live on in peace and dignity, so should they so choose. This bill does not contain any protections against scenarios where people who are conflicted might try to suggest upon a person with disabilities that they should simply accept death. We put forward an amendment to make sure that a case like Roger Foley's would never happen again by banning medical professionals and other caregivers from raising the issue of assisted dying with a patient, rather than letting the patient raise the issue him or herself. The government opposed that. The government is removing the requirement there be two witnesses to sign off before someone dies. They're removing the 10-day waiting period, which allows people who might be in a burst of urgent distress to consider and reconsider their decision, a decision that we all know is absolutely irreversible, the most irreversible of all decisions, that is to end one's life. Why the government would oppose such protections to ensure that the patient truly does consent to end of life, I don't know. But I do know one thing, and I will conclude on this, that we must protect the freedom and the choice of all our people, and that we must recognize the dignity and worth of every human life. Thank you.